The Black Shroud, a beautiful cacophony of birds and wind, boughs bending, leaves rustling, grass crunching beneath your feet. With so much possessed of the environment, you'd be hard-pressed to decide what objects might have been built yesterday or hundreds of years ago. The sprawling veins of ivy and life course through the woods like a devouring pulse, some by nature's design, while others by the design of mysterious creatures known as the elementals. These legendary creatures are seldom seen, and even less likely to be heard, choosing instead to commune with the hearers of Gridania. They are creatures of immeasurable power, and it was that very same power that caused newly migrated Eorzean to seek shelter beneath the very dirt I walk on now. Cure would soon follow, and from a hard-fought union did the two races come to terms and establish the ancient city of Gelmorra. Today, we'll be exploring what remains of this great civilization, what caused it to be built, and eventually wither away. My name is Juliet, and this is the Eorzean Historian. Our story first begins over 900 years ago, in the year 660 of the 6th Astral Era. The Hyur had begun their second mass migration to Eorzea. Upon arriving, they were met by native Eorzean, who did not take kindly to their lands being absconded. Unfortunately, the Eorzean were forced to depart from their homes, moving instead towards a sacred wood known as the Black Shroud. At first, things seemed to be alright, but the deeper they went, the more they required of the woods. They attempted to build homes and hamlets, but the Eorzean soon discovered they were within the jaws of another enemy, one they could not see. Written accounts of this event would describe the period as chaotic and frightening. In my hand is one such diary, and it reads thus: 16th sun of the second
astral moon. Every morning we wake to the mist, a beguiling sight that weaves through the tree line, and although I cannot hear them, many of the children claim voices speak from beyond the veil. I sometimes see shadows, but my wife says it's a trick of the light. I cannot help but feel we're being watched. People try to go about their days as if nothing is wrong, but I can see the fear in their eyes. Just last week, one of the neighbors' houses suddenly and inexplicably burned to the ground. I'm sorry to say her family was trapped inside. We've lost touch with our brethren who had set up in a glade a few miles out, but any attempt to reach them is met with a messenger who never returns. We're on guard, but we know not against what. There are talks of leaving the shroud, but to what? Our home is gone. Our only chance is to make do here or find our way through to another. I thought I saw a shadow against my wall. It looked like a small person shape with wings, almost like a bug. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Something is out there. It's watching us. I know it. And I'm beginning to think nowhere is safe.
The diary had no follow-up entries, and the cover is ominously charred, as if it were exposed to a fire. It would be several years before the Eorzean of the Wood finally understood what foe they faced. Native beings of pure, etheric energies known as the Elementals. The Elementals seemed to feel as if the Eorzean had encroached upon their home. Struggling to fight such an elusive foe, the Eorzean were once again forced to flee what paltry home they had created, instead finding succor within the many caves and tunnels that ran beneath the shroud. Although it came at the cost of immeasurable death, the dwindling population was able to find a modicum of peace and sanctuary. Until somewhere around the year 710, it was around this time that the Hyur, who had taken Eorzean land, began to expand further, and their ever-encroaching hands found their grip upon the Shroud. However, they soon encountered the same mysterious force as the Eorzean. It was through this chaos and confusion that the Hyur stumbled upon the civilization of the Eorzean, who had been steadily growing in the comfort of the tunnels. Seeing the safety of the underground labyrinth, the Hyur began a series of conflicts with the Eorzean that escalated into near total war beneath the earth. This back-and-forth conflict lasted roughly 30 years before the Eorzean and Hyur realized they succeeded in nothing but nearly destroying each other. With neither willing to return to the surface to face the wrath of the elementals, the truce between the two races was signed. With their differences aside, the Hyur and the Eorzean founded the subterranean city of Gelmorra, and over the course of 300 years did they know peace, building and expanding the city, all beneath the Shroud to depths and distances scholars can't even begin to map. The Black Shroud, as we know it today, is a maze of trees and inconsistent cliffs. While beautifully masked by the emerald overgrowth, it nonetheless showcases a world once torn asunder. Gelmorra primarily existed within the networks of caves we would expect of that civilization, but many of its ruins and tunnels were exposed and destroyed from the Seventh Umbral Calamity. One such example is of our first stop. Here in the central shroud you can find a small outcrop known as Spirithold. This dark and decrepit place was once used by Gridania to hold prisoners while they awaited judgment, before they would be shipped off to the 1,000 Maws of Toto-Rak. Despite the prison no longer being in use, a Gridanian tower still stands, with guards at the ready. Though, this is not why we're here. Spirithold, before it was used by the Gridanians, was a Gelmorran structure. Its exact use is unknown, nor is it clearly defined when the change was made to turn it into a jail. But before we step inside, I want to explore some of the exterior points of interest. Most notably, you'll notice that the exterior is quite exposed, which is uncommon for a city built underground. My belief is that the area known as Green Tier used to stretch across this whole basin, but the calamity tore it asunder, which is apparent in the way that this hill is structured. You can tell that it's a remnant of a very steep landslide, and the removal of the earth exposed the ruins for all to see. The road leading up to Spirithold also possesses these pillar-like stone lamps. These were a common occurrence within the tunnels of Gelmorra. They served as both structural support and light to guide the way. Their presence here suggests that this very road I stand on was once a tunnel, repurposed after the calamity. This is a common thing that happens over time. As roads update with the period, they're often paved over and renamed. Above the structure, we can see what looks like aqueduct channels or air vents. Once you cross the threshold, it becomes obvious this area was meant to be underground. The roof has since crumbled, but the general facade of the structure is intact. There are wooden gates that you would often find within Gelmorran Ruins, usually used to bar entry somewhere. Here it appears to have been used as a long since deteriorated gate. Just beyond is a circular room. The stairs lead upwards towards an inner chamber, while the area just inside is void of any obvious use, though the presence of a more modern bench suggests either a staging area for prisoners being transported in, or a place where the guards would gather and rest during hours of service. Any inkling to what it was used for in the days of Gelmorra have long since vanished. It's possible, given the theory I have for what Spirithold might have once been, that a statue or some other decoration may have resided here. As for my theory, let's head inside and dig into it. As you can see, the main interior is a wide room, largely dominated by a colossal tree. Given its size, it most likely has resided here since the days of Gelmorra, over 500 years ago. Though, at the time I expect it was far smaller. The walls are lined with modern-day lamps, but the old Gelmorran torches are used as well. Alcoves in the walls showcase their use as shelves for candles and other items. The iron gates that seal off each of these branched rooms are notably more recent than their surroundings. These were used as holding cells in recent history, but further in the past, they may have been something more. Which brings me to my theory. Given the proximity it has to our next stop, I feel that it was once a far more holy place than it is now. It might have been intended to and housed those who kept vigil over the nearby Tam-Tara Deepcroft. with these outer rooms being their own residences. If this were a sacred place to the Gelmorrans, it is likely that the use of it becoming a prison to the Gridanians did not happen until much later in time. As for why I think it directly connects to the Tam-Tara Deepcroft, we need only look to the back wall for that. Though boarded up now, we can see that there is a tunnel that decidedly leads towards the west. If we were to exit Spirithold and take a look in this tunnel from the opposite bank, we would find some rather interesting clues. As you can see in the face of this cliff, there are two tunnels, sliced cleanly away. While the lower tunnel is completely caved in, this upper tunnel is what you see connected to Spirithold. Now, what's interesting about these, aside from the obvious, is that just across the river, we can see what remains of what was once most assuredly a tunnel leading southwest. The trademark Gelmorran lamps and walls have crumbled, but their presence is unmistakable, and when you compare the angle of its trajectory, you can see that it roughly lines up with the tunnels across the cliff. Of course, you're probably also wondering about the height difference. That can most likely be attributed to our friend, Bahamut. The calamity saw the earth not only crumble down, but forcibly rise up and tear apart. It's extremely likely that not only were these tunnels closer to the ground, but the very ground I stand on might have been higher up as well. When we look at the top of this cliff in relation to the bank across the river, we can see a general shape almost seems to fit together like a puzzle. It's difficult to imagine what it even looked like back then, but we can say one thing for certain, that these must have been connected in some way to each other. When we follow our little outcrop, you can see the right side bends a bit more, lending to the theory that the many roads of the Shroud may have once been cavern roads. But now, on to our next stop. The Tam-Tara Deepcroft is an old Gelmorran crypt, filled with the remains of those bygone citizens of royal descent. As you can see straight away, the road begins to lead downwards, emphasizing the depth of the croft. Given the distance of the lanterns versus the left side wall, we can assume this road was far larger than it seemed. Just before we reach the main structure, we can find a large chunk of oddly shaped wall. It curves with the road, but if we look to the other side, we can see it does the same thing. An aerial view showcases how it was once a point where two Gelmorran tunnels once met, and how the one on the left has been completely lost, replaced now with a modern-day trail. Now, as we turn our attention to the main building, we can see how it's partially buried in the ground. The main building consists of three crypts: the main forward crypt, which we have direct access to, the back left crypt, in which resides the Tam-Tara Deepcroft dungeon, and the right crypt, which has not been accessed since the days of Gelmorra. Atop each of these domes is a spire, with an open-aired structure. It's difficult to know what may have, if anything, had laid within the gaps, but it's possible they were lamps, given their similarity to Gelmorran lamps. Now you've probably noticed the roof is covered in grass, and even trees. The initial question I had was, why build such astonishing structures, like the spires, above ground where no one can see them since no one leaves the caves? That's when I made a startling discovery. If we take a look around the cliffs surrounding Tam-Tara, we can see a perfect crater has formed around the rim. Based on the shape, I believe ground level once existed up to this ridge, and the calamity caused the ridge to break and collapse onto the roof, turning it into the oddity it is today. Concept art by my friend Becky showcases what this extraordinary structure might have looked like to the Gelmorrans. To see such a large building completely submerged beneath the ground really drives home the ingenuity of those who walked these darkened halls. Now, moving to the entrance, we can see a symbol of unknown meaning that dons the mantle of the threshold, and the doorway itself is reinforced with the portcullis and gate, showcasing just how important it was to protect this place. Inside is a large spacious room, which is currently infected with the undead. Brought to life by the lamps of Dalamud, these unholy relics might have awoken from their slumber in this very room. Looking around, we can find about 7 sarcophagi, and there are 8 skeletons. The number is close enough that it might be possible they once resided in these very spots. The walls have those common indents for candles and shelves. To the left, there is a door that leads to the left crypt, in which access is restricted except to those with permission by the wood whalers guarding it. We have permission to enter, but I'm afraid exploring that deeper crypt will have to wait until another video. Across the room we can find another door tucked away, though entry is simply impossible without destroying the area. It most likely leads to the crypt we saw on the right. Next to it, we can find a very peculiar indent. At first glance, you might think it's a tear in the wall, but the triangle shape is framed by bricks, which suggests its design was intentional. It's possible that there was a crack due to some incident in the deep past, and it was reinforced as to not spread, but something about it strikes me as deliberate. Its connection could very well be linked to whatever lies beyond the door beside it, but what its purpose was, or what might have rested on its ledge, is a mystery we may never know. Located in the South Shroud, just east of Buscaron's Druthers, we can find a road that leads to the Thousand Maws of Toto-Rak. This series of caves was aptly named after a legendary Pajali monster. It was used primarily as a prison for Gridania. Despite the Gelmorran architecture, I believe the Thousand Maws is an excellent example of construction during a transitional phase. You see, when the Gelmorrans did finally leave and begin to create Gridania, there was most assuredly a period of time wherein the architectural style of the Gelmorrans, that existed for some odd 300 years, wasn't completely abandoned. It's very likely that this dungeon was created in the early days of the Exodus. One of the main reasons for this theory is that it does not connect to any other cave system. Here's why I think this. The main road leading up to the Thousand Maws clearly existed as a tunnel up to this junction here, based on the ruins of walls and lamps along the way. Even though the tunnel was obliterated by the calamity, we can see these lamps stop here. If we take a look at what surrounds us at this junction, we can see Buscaron's Druthers and Quarry Miller nearby. Both of these hamlets were built after the Exodus and existed prior to the calamity. Since they exist on the same level ground as this entrance, we can safely assume that the ground has not shifted up or down, and I doubt that a road would connect these two hamlets with a wall between them. What this tells us is that in order to reach the Thousand Maws, you would have to first go to the surface and then enter via this single entrance. This behavior would have been incredibly unlikely, as Gelmorrans specifically stayed underground at almost all times to avoid the wrath of the elementals. That being said, these ruins are still around 500 years old, so they're nothing to snuff at, and it will be covered in greater detail in its own video. Our next stop is only a stone's throw away, Isam Har. When Bahamut came down, he tore the land asunder, and this fissure revealed what many have concluded was the residential district of Gelmorra proper. Not much can be seen in the immediate area, save for a high density of Gelmorran torches. As many expeditioners can attest, the real secrets lay within, but the deeper explorations are plagued with monsters and beasts, giving it the popular title of Palace of the Dead. This, much like Tam-Tara and the Thousand Maws, is an extensive labyrinth of historical significance, enough so that a deeper dive into its history will have to be explored in a later video. Until then, we turn our attention to our next stop on the overworld ruins of Gelmorra. The Mun-Tuy Cellars stand as Gridania's premier fermentation lab and distillery. It is the only known Gelmorran ruin still in use today that also performs the same task it had performed in the days of Eld. Prior to the calamity, many knew the Mun-Tuy Cellars to also be plagued with monsters, and would often need adventurers to clear it out. However, veterans might also remember that the Mun-Tuy Cellars were located in the North Shroud before the calamity. So you might ask, how did it end up being a bridge between the East and South Shrouds? The answer lies in its sheer size. When the calamity struck, the tunnels that once occupied the North Shroud were caved in, but tunnels that directly connected that to the original complex surfaced as far as this location in the South and East Shrouds. This section of the tunnels was unknown to the denizens of Gridania for years, and since being recovered from the elements, all processes of fermentation were moved to this location, even utilizing tools that were uncovered from within the ruins. These fermentation airlocks have their origins dating back to Gelmorran times, though I expect they've been modified given modern technology and understanding. Could use with a brush off though. The gate outside is of a relatively newer construction, as in it was likely built after the Exodus. This theory is in due part to the simple question of why would it have existed before. The interior is remarkably intact, and has not changed since the days of Eld, not even since the calamity, albeit the items dispersed within are different. There is a door that is sealed off to the general public, though it likely contains more of the distillery. In fact, why don't we try asking someone? Sorry to bother you. Could you tell me what's beyond that door?
I swear to Nafika. Every time I just get into the group of things, another obnoxious adventurer comes knocking. Go away!
They seem to be a bit occupied. Maybe we should just move to our next stop. The last stretch of our journey, funnily enough, takes us to the North Shroud, where it's possible that all of Gelmorra began. Standing behind me are what remains of the simply titled Gelmorran Ruins. It's unknown exactly what these ruins were meant to signify, but given their grand size and shape, it's often theorized that this very structure was once the first entrance to the subterranean city. As you can see, it's a bit worse for wear since the calamity. Having once stood above ground several miles to the north, a terrible landslide caused the upper half of these ruins to slide down and collapse, becoming completely filled in and partially buried. Before the calamity had struck, we can see that the ruins were a massive complex of pillars with 2 sets of stairs and, most notably, peculiar amber statues. Many people, myself included, believed these statues to be representative of tomberries, but the calamity reduced these effigies to ash. Another thing to note is that the hole, even before the calamity, was filled in. The structure lacks any method of descending into the caves below, which begs the question, was this really an entrance? It's possible a spiral stair could have existed. I find it less probable, but I suppose likely, that rope or wooden ladders were once used. Without a clear answer, it opens up the possibility that perhaps this wasn't an entrance at all, but something more ominous, such as an execution ground, or maybe just a place of religious worship. The elementals would have made it difficult for the Gelmorrans to practice any kind of ceremony above ground, but one can always wonder what sort of things might have happened on these mysterious stones. Our next stop is just up the road a ways. We'll pass through Peace Garden, which we'll come back to later, and here we can find the entrance to Proud Creek. Winding throughout Proud Creek is an ancient road of Gelmorran origin. The calamity has caused its collapse, and what remains is the partially standing structure of a cave. Something to note about it is that the whole road is very wide. The ground is paved, as are the stairs. Many of the walls remain intact and even sport the flora that once dwelled within the cavern, such as the glowing mushrooms. In this initial area, we can find a small headstone that is one of the resting places of a Toto-Rak, a prolific white mage who left behind gifts for a worthy successor long after the Exodus. The path then branches into 3 directions, the most curious of which lead up the stairs to a doorway. The symbol of a fleur-de-lis rests above the threshold, and a cursory peek inside showcases a hall that winds out of sight. While we can't be sure where this leads, it's entirely possible that it might have once been the entrance to the Order of Mages led by Joran Lightheart. This is pure speculation, though. Across the way is an outcrop of what was once a hall and has since collapsed. It's an excellent example of showcasing just how intricate the levels of the tunnels were. Just on the steps to the west, we can find a large spacious room, though any notion of what it might have once been eludes us. If we continue to follow the stairs, we can take a right into what is now the Ixali logging grounds. This area has been thoroughly cleared, but signs that it was once part of the same complex still remain. Just opposite is another little outcrop, one still engrossed in the shade of the underground, while the other is left in shambles. All of this leads to the final stop on the road, a large atrium. Above, we can see several supports for the various levels of caves, and as for the atrium itself, we can but wonder what it might have held. Its sheer size, connected to the road, implies a high level of traffic must have been present through here. It'd be a wonder if perhaps it was a market of some kind, holding all kinds of stalls. The very edge of the atrium is framed by 2 pillars, clearly meant to be a doorway. At first glance, you'd think it exited into the open, but if you were to follow the road, you would find not only shattered remains of the walls, but the cobblestone floor. What this tells us is that the cave system continued for quite a ways, but for how far, we may never know. Bahamut's wrath was so extreme that it's nearly impossible to tell what life was like in the days of Gelmorra. In those days, just before the calamity, very little of the subterranean city was even exposed for the world to see. It was around the year 1020 that the Ixali, who had predominantly resided within the Shroud, incurred the wrath of the elementals. Their ever-growing population facilitated the need for expansion, which ultimately forced the elementals to drive them from the Shroud. The Gelmorrans saw this as an opportunity to attempt to parley with the elementals, but did not know how. It wasn't until the year 1076 that Joran Lightheart was finally able to commune with the elementals, in the area we now call Peace Garden, hence the name. A deal was struck, and in exchange for protecting the Shroud, the Gelmorrans would be allowed to live on the surface. They began construction of Gridania in the year 1077. The settlement of Quarrymill was constructed as the base of operations for Gridania's creation, with Buscarun's druthers soon to follow, along with what I theorize was the Thousand Maws, though at the time it may have had a different name, since it follows Pajali legends, and the Pajali were still fairly new. During this phase of construction, I believe there was a transitional phase of architecture, as I mentioned earlier. The Thousand Maws was one such structure, but if you pay close attention to Buscarun's and Quarrymill, you would find the foundations are built of the selfsame stonework, and no doubt you've noticed these lamps scattered across the pathways throughout the Shroud. I believe these lamps were constructed in those early days, as they share similarities to Gelmorran architecture, but they're lit using a different method than Gelmorran lamps. This same type of bulb can be found on the gates of the Mun-Tuy Cellars and throughout Gridania. Now, while most of the inhabitants were ready to jump at the opportunity to move to the surface, not everyone was excited. Many of the Eorzean felt their brethren were betraying their way of life, and instead opted to remain within the tunnels and caverns. This group of Eorzean eventually became a clan of Duskwights, and where they reside specifically is unknown. Even though Gelmorra is no longer recognized as an existing city, somewhere, in the depths of the realm, the Duskwights continue to carry on the traditions of those who came before. The Black Shroud is almost entirely a world of its own, whether it's the history of Gridania, Gelmorra, or even the older Amdapor. Every rock, every tree, imprints and preserves the stories that came before it. It's constantly changing and growing, burying ruins here or uncovering new ones there. It's an emerald labyrinth, teeming with life. So the next time you wander beneath its shaded canopy, take a moment to appreciate the glimpse of the past that you have, for it's very likely that the next time you look, it may be gone entirely. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please feel free to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. The growth this channel has had in such a short time has been incredible, and I'm really lucky to be given the support I have. Please feel free to let me know your own theories on what some of these ruins could have been in the comments below. And if you can guess what we're going to explore next, I'll be sure to give you a shout out in the next video. I'll give you a hint. It's behind me. This has been the Eorzean Historian, signing off until our next great adventure. Ciao for now!